You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Have you ever noticed that women who work with and for the rights of other women most of the time started from a position of relative powerlessness themselves? They changed something in their own lives, which was transformative, and so healthy and powerful that they set about to help other women get there too. Well, this week's guests are three such women, each one unique. All three are a triple threat to the patriarchy. But first, before we get to them, we need to look inside the headlines. As you might well have imagined, I did not exhaust my fury at the two recent Supreme Court decisions last week. The decisions came down just as we were wrapping that week's show, and I didn't have time for a really thoughtful response, or even a fulminating, unthoughtful one. But I've now had some time, and so I'm going to comment today, now, and also at the end of the program. First issue behind the headlines is actually good news. Diana DeGette, representative from Colorado, 1st District, and Representative Jerry Nadler, New York, 10th District, in fact, my representative to Congress, bless their hearts, are co-sponsoring a bill that they are introducing to basically overturn the Supreme Court's Hobby Lobby decision. Diana DeGette is co-chair of the House Pro-Choice Caucus, and Jerry Nadler is a leader in the fight for the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was used as the excuse by the court. And they announced that they are going to be introducing such legislation. They will ensure that for-profit employers cannot use the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to override women's access to contraception, since Congress never intended RFRA to be used by employers as a means of interfering with private health care choices of their employees. So you might, if you have a spare moment, just drop a note to Congress to Representative Diana DeGette, D-E-G-E-T-T-E, and Representative Jerry Nadler, N-A-D-L-E-R, and just give them a hooray and a kudo and a bravo, because you know that they're getting inundated with hate mail from the Friends of the Fetus on the religious right. So that's a piece of good news. The other piece of news about reproductive rights is quite revealing. It's a headline from Iran, where lawmakers have just recently moved toward criminalizing vasectomies and tubal ligations. That was at the end of June, on June 24th. They have approved a bill meant to counter a drop in the country's population. This was reported by the Iranian Students News Agency. The measure, which still requires ratification by a constitutional watchdog being hilarity of contradiction in terms, it's from the Iranians, taking care of their constitution. Anyway, it would supposedly require ratification by this supposed person, but meanwhile, the measure would imprison those convicted of performing vasectomies and tubal ligations for 2 to 5 years. Why is this happening now? Well, it's a zag after a zig. Having successfully curbed birth rates for 2 decades, now Iran is concerned that it has a graying population. Oops! So now it's promoting a baby boom to help make up for that graying population. It's a perfect example of women being a tool in the hands of the state to create armies when necessary, to create workforce when necessary, to not when it's too large, to feed. Women's rights, bodily integrity, reproductive freedom, and reproductive freedom as a basic human right, that doesn't hold any water whatsoever. And all those words, fine words here in this country about religious freedom and morality, and the sanctity of life basically boil down to this exact thing, which at least Iran is being more honest about. All the other fine phrases, well, you could spread them on my roses and the roses would grow, if you know what I mean. This, of course, the Hobby Lobby decision and the accompanying one after it, places the United States, yet again, in league with Iran, one of the few countries who falls into that questionable category, along with still using capital punishment, along with not paying performing artists for their work on radio play, only democratic country in the world not to do so, and other various goodies that we have in common with Iran. So Iran is at least honest about why they're doing this. We have enough people, then we put you on birth control. We don't have enough people, off birth control. And I wish we'd at least be as honest here. But more about that in Fighting Words at the end of the program. Meanwhile, don't forget to give a shout out to Diana DeGette and Jerry Nadler in Congress. And now it's time for our first guest. Rachel Preston Prinz is an evolutionary architectural designer. She graduated from Texas A&M with a master's in architecture and a certificate in historic preservation, and her work has included architectural forensics, archaeological architecture, historic preservation, handicapped accessibility, and design of bioclimate structures. And now she's into something, well, not completely different, but very interesting indeed. Here's Rachel Preston Prinz. Welcome to the program, Rachel.
Thank you.
Well, would you start out, please, by telling me and our listeners what is an evolutionary architectural designer? It sounds wonderful.
It's more fun than anything I've ever done before, that's for sure. An evolutionary architectural designer, in my case, is someone who has, I've done the traditional path of architecture, architecturally trained, master's, professional degree in architecture, worked in the firms for many, many years for other people, learned everything that I could. And then I started really sitting with what architecture meant to me. And what I thought we should be doing as architects. And I asked myself how I could make a difference, because it became very clear very quickly, especially when I was working in Vail. We were designing multi-million dollar homes. I mean, $10 million was average.
Wow.
And while it's extraordinary to get to work on architecture at that level, there are a lot of aspects of the architecture that we were designing that I realized, how do I even say this?
Weren't good for the planet?
It isn't. It's not. You know, when you're designing at least 5,000 square foot, maybe as much as 10,000 square foot house for someone to live in for a month a year.
Yeah.
And you realize the extraordinary amount of input. $3,000 a month was not a atypical electrical bill.
Yeah.
And I just kept thinking about all of the mountaintops in Virginia and West Virginia, and that would have to be taken off to power that.
So when you shifted, what do you do now?
I came to New Mexico, and I learned how to work with dirt. And I also learned, I got my hands in the earth again. Yeah. And I think that was part of the fundamental shift that happened to me, is that for so long I was so in my mind, and I was drawing things on computers. So people here just make do with very limited resources. And there was something beautiful about that to me, because I started to realize that they were creating beautiful places with very little input, financial input. It was more things that were coming from the heart. They were handmade. They were found objects. And it became a creative exercise. And I wanted to ask myself what I could do to help people achieve the beauty that wealthy people surround themselves with all the time.
That everybody has a right to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it actually impacts us on a cellular level. When you wake up in a place where you feel safe, where you have all your needs met, and where you're surrounded in beauty, you naturally start your day off on a better foot.
Sure you do.
You're more present to love on your kids, and you're more present in your community. And I just wanted to see if there was any way that I could raise the baseline and start sharing ideas that usually is reserved for people who can afford architects with the whole, and see if we could have more sustainable architecture, more happy people.
You know, in the 70s, there was the beginning of a sort of women's architectural movement as feminism was exploding everywhere. Excuse me. And there was the usual question, asked more in a nuanced way, not the way men would ask it necessarily, or patriarchy would ask it. Did women architects create and envision differently from men? And certainly if you look at the work of someone like Maya Lin, you think, wow, we haven't seen that before. Or even, I'm trying to remember her name, the Palestinian woman architect who's so brilliant. Is it Haddad? I believe it is. Yeah. I believe it is. Very lyrical work. And I remember when I first saw Hatshepsut's tomb in the Valley of the Kings in Giza, you'd seen all of these pharaohs, and they were all filled with, he smote this group and smote the other group and took prisoners, and they were all gigantic, and their temples were looming, and and then you come across Hatshepsut's temple, and it was done by a male architect, but at her design, and it's in like Frank Lloyd Wright, it's nestled in the mountain, and it has wheelchair access, not really, of course, but it has ramps instead of steps, and all of the wall murals are about releasing the prisoners from Punt and giving them garlands, and they have cymbals and they're dancing. And I thought I was losing my mind. I mean, it was like entering a totally different space. Do you think there is something to that? I don't mean genetically, but because we've been powerless for so long. What do you think about that?
I tend to think of women as thinking, or at least the ones I have worked with, and of course I surround myself with people like this now, because they inspire me, is that I tend to think that women think of the world more especially in architecture, more of a whole. It's more like a spider web that goes in every direction. Yeah. And we're the center point of it. We're the part that connects all the pieces that we're in at that moment. There's a
wonderful line by the poet Kathleen Raine that is simply, the center of the mandala is everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in every dimension. And the women that I surround myself with in the profession are doing that. They look at the connections. They see these sort of subtle things that they're almost like, without getting too woo-woo, they're almost like lines of energy that are happening through the architecture and through the community. And it seems like we tend to be more weavers. We take a bunch of different threads and make something out of it.
And this evinces itself in what you're doing there. You're doing tours and workshops on Southwest architecture. You're doing bioclimate design, radical sustainability, eco-communities, sacred architecture. My God.
It's a dream job.
Well, yeah, no, it's fantastic. Is there a website where people can locate you if they're going to New Mexico, or even if they're not?
Yes, it's Archenia. That's actually even part of it. So the name of my firm is Archenia, and Arca for architecture, and Nia is a form of dance actually that integrates martial arts and yoga and dance and health traditions, and it's about moving through space.
Okay.
So for me, that's what my practice is about.
Spell the workshop spell the website.
It's ARCHININ as in Nike IA.com.
Okay.
ARCHINIA.com.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and thank you for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robin.
We have to take a short break here on Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and when I return, I'll be speaking with a woman who, well, you could say she literally reinvented the wheel, but in a very good way. We'll be talking with Molly Cantrell-Kraig, who is the founder of Women with Drive.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome back. Now, imagine being a single mom on welfare in Iowa and trying to find a job and trying to earn an associate's degree and trying to take care of your kids, all of that, doing it without a car. No wheels. Well, that was Molly Cantrell-Kraig's experience 25 years ago, and from that experience, not only did she learn, but she's built a foundation that changes women's lives. Molly Cantrell-Kraig is the founder of the Women with Drive Foundation, and now she's ready to expand to the whole world. Molly Cantrell-Kraig, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Tell us how Women with Drive began as an idea.
Well, I faced it myself. About 25 years ago, I was a single mother. My daughter was 4 months old, and I went back to college, but I did not have a vehicle. So I had a friend of mine who was a welder in a nearby town where the college was, and he drove me to school, and I got dropped off 2 hours early and went to classes, and then proceeded to go from there in terms of getting through my college years. And then eventually I worked for a newspaper when I was employed, and again, still the single mother, and whenever my car would not work, I was able to call down and ask one of the guys in the delivery, people who would drop off newspapers, and they'd pick me up and take me to work and take my kids to school until I was able to afford a really nice, reliable vehicle. So I know what it's like to have the drive to do something, but not have literally the transportation to get you from point A to point B, so that when I had an opportunity in my life to create such a solution, I did.
Sometimes I think to myself that one of the major feminist issues should be mass transport. Because, of course, I live in New York, and so we're very lucky. We have all sorts of choices of mass transportation. But it's easy to forget that there are parts of this country, most of this country, that really don't have good mass transportation systems.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but what we're finding is even in Chicago, there's a case where there are jobs that are available and people who want to work at them, but for whatever reason, if they get a shift change or something or other, there might be just one specific train that goes from point A to point B, and if that train isn't available to that applicant or that person, she no longer has the opportunity to remain employed and to provide for her family. Even in a city that has a pretty well high-functioning CTA, a community transportation association such as the Chicago area, there are women who are working hard and who are slipping through the cracks, and so our goal as an organization is to help identify those women and provide those women with that solution to keeping a job so that they have a roof above their heads and food for their children.
It's so grounded and practical. It's just terrific. And you started that. It really is. I mean, you started this in Iowa, and last year you moved the foundation to Chicago. And it's not only equipping them with wheels, but it's a whole training program too, isn't it?
That's correct. What we found is, again, in my own experience as becoming an autonomous individual, there's multiple layers to holistic autonomy. We have 5 platforms that include family, community, financial, education, and health. But what we do to keep highly focused on the transportation aspect is we front load the system by engaging organizations, both public and private, who are already providing those capacity building skills, and they're already high functioning. They're already doing their job, so why reinvent the wheel? So we work through those agencies that provide things like financial literacy or job placement skills, and we provide the missing element of transportation. So our goal is to serve as a bridge between people who want to do the work and the employers who wish to hire them. And we work through those agencies to identify and vet individuals who are ready to invest in themselves.
So many cases that we hear of, fortunately we're past the days when they used to blame battered women for staying, because claiming that they must like being battered. Mostly the consciousness has been, we've done the education, and people know that at first they had nowhere else to go. There weren't battered women's shelters, etc., etc. But one of the reasons also is mobility. It's just simply that. I'm sure you must have encountered that as well.
Absolutely. Well, the thing is that a lot of people have the illusion that we have a fleet of cars at our beck and call, and we're like Pez, and we just dispense cars like the fairy godmother, when in fact it's a much more intensive experience in terms of that vetting opportunity, and we've got to identify people. Mm-hmm. But prior to founding Women with Drive, I served on the board of a domestic violence shelter. I've seen what it's like, the systemic dismantling of a woman's psychological underpinnings before mm-hmm. the first punch is thrown. So our goal as an organization is actually to work in concert with domestic violence shelters, because there has to be, in my opinion, I would like to see maybe a mini fleet of cars that are serviceable and ready to roll, so that when that woman is ready to go, she has a safe way to escape, because you can't strap your kids to your back and get on a bicycle.
Exactly.
Exactly. You've got to have something that's there. And the thing is that women do take some time to leave.
Yes.
Sometimes it's like, I don't know what the statistical average is, but it probably takes, I think, between 5 and 9. I'm not exactly sure on that number. But it takes a lot of courage to jump out into the unknown. And
of
so
course.
Women sometimes have more than one time before they're ready to go. But if they are ready to go and we've got the support team in place, then it's incumbent upon us as an organization to help those women help themselves.
What a brilliant idea that would be, your idea for a whole fleet. We have to work on that. We have to get.
Oh, absolutely. And there's brains out there that can do that. I refuse to believe that there's not.
Of course, especially since we now know that the most dangerous time is when a batterer senses that she actually is finally about to leave. That's
absolutely. That's he or she ramps up the intensity.
That's correct. That's absolutely mm-hmm. right. So beyond Wheels for Women all over the world in need, what are your plans for the foundation, just to continue growing and going national eventually?
Well, yes, we were featured in the Huffington Post last year, and when we were still in Iowa, and we started receiving requests for chapters from New York, Boston, Atlanta, L.A., Seattle,
wow.
and Houston.
Wow.
And so we started to really see that we didn't have the density of resources in Iowa. We have really great people on the ground in Iowa, but to use the startup analogy, we just didn't have the resources to fail fast enough in Iowa
yes.
to meet that need. So we moved to Chicago in order to learn how to fail fast enough. And then when we were featured on as part of the CNN Visionary Women, we started receiving chapter requests from Alaska, Florida, New Mexico, just all over the place. And so our goal is to start awarding vehicles here in Chicago within the next 3 to 6 months. And in order to do that, we're going to need to raise about $250,000 in capital. Mm-hmm. But we already have a waiting list of 100 women who have been vetted and identified as women who have a high chance of succeeding. Mm-hmm. And so if we can get those funds to invest in these women here in Chicago, we can learn through our pilot program how to start awarding chapters in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And then eventually I have friends of mine who have communications with various chambers of commerce here in Illinois and Iowa, so we can move into like Rockford and Rock Island and Springfield and Peoria and, in Iowa, back where I was from, we've got, Clinton and Davenport and Burlington and all of these different, and Cedar Rapids. I mean, there's all sorts of towns that represent statistical means.
Sure.
And by means, I mean averages of types of people who need help and who are willing to do the work. And again, I think it's incumbent upon us as an organization and society, when someone's ready to roll, you put your hand out and you help them up.
Absolutely.
We're all about the dynamism. We're all about the dynamism of working with someone who's ready to work for herself, because it's social physics, what I refer to as social physics. It's easier to keep a body in motion than it is to convince a body he or she needs to get in motion.
That's right.
So we rely heavily on those organizations who do our vetting for us to say, you know what, this person is ready to roll. This person's ready to get some skin in the game. And I think that that's exciting, to work with someone who's ready to change her life or his life.
Well, if our listeners who are an activist group want to get involved or help or inquire about a branch near them or donate, what is the website that they should go to?
It's womenwithdrive.org.
.org.
Yep, and that site has our statistics that back up the population we serve, broken out by gender and all sorts of different statistical. There's also how we work, and there's also an opportunity to donate. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to plug in. We seek what we call the 3 C's of cars, collaboration, and cash.
Okay, that sounds like a very good summary of the 3 C's. And that's womenwithdrive.org. Thank you so much, Molly, for the work that you're doing, which is just terrific. And thanks for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks so much for chatting this morning.
And now it's time to meander toward the Surrealism Corner. Ooh. There are 3 very different items in today's Surrealism Corner, all scrunched in there together. The first is a visual item, so I'm going to give you the website where you can look it up, because it will just make you grin. Well, that is, if you, like me, had a childhood filled with old Ivanhoe, for example, and the comic strip about Prince Valiant, and then later on Mort Arthur and King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and all of that. Oh, yes, it was very big in my childhood and young adulthood before it led to some very real, wonderful poetry. So this has particular resonance for me and might not for you, but I think it's enough to make you grin anyway. The website is www.thegeekocracy, GeekOcracy.com. And then you want to do a search for Modern Day Knight. Female wins the longsword competition at the World Invitational Tournament. Now, first of all, who knew there was a World Invitational Tournament in European martial arts, is what they're calling these kinds of fights. I suppose they joust, and they have the short sword, and they have the mace, and I don't know what else they had, but I do know that the longsword competition at the World Internationals has been won for the first time by a female longsword expert. Her actual name is Samantha E. Cato -Mott. She's a hyphenate. She's British, but she goes by the name Samantha Swords. And she has special swords made for her, and she has special armor made for her. And on the website, there's this wonderful picture of her in her armor, a young woman, quite lithe, with very lightweight armor. And then there's a video of her talking about her passion for this, as she puts it, martial art sport. Samantha Swords, she's really quite a wonderful knight. And the idea that one doesn't have to be a lady languishing in a tower waiting for the knight, but the knight herself, is really cool. That's my geekdom showing. That's the first item. The second item, I've been meaning to say this on and off and keep forgetting, but if you haven't been watching Cosmos, the series on television, oh, treat yourself and do. And if you have, isn't it wonderful? You know, it's a rerun, in a sense, of the great Cosmos series that Carl Sagan did in the 70s and 80s. And in fact, it is written and produced by his widow, Anne Druyan. And this time it's narrated by Neil deGrasse Tyson, upon whom I have an enormous crush. And it is visually absolutely stunning, politically factual and fair and openly non-religious, openly scientific, making the connections between ignorance and cruelty. And it's just filled with awe and wonder, and I come away from it elated. So look up in your local listings and online. I'm sure the series in its entirety will be available on DVD as well, and it probably is worth having. It's just so great. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is a very interesting new item that's come up in science on plants protecting themselves by listening. Yeah, you heard right. It's been known for quite a while that some plants respond to sound, but the way I understood it was that what they were actually responding to was not when you lean over and talk to your plants like Prince Charles got laughed at for doing, but because when you do that, you are at the same time exhaling carbon dioxide, which the plants enjoy. But apparently they are also listening to sound. And one reason, according to researchers, is that plants listen and learn how to defend themselves against predators. And they did an experiment where they exposed one set of plants to a recording of caterpillars munching on leaves, and they kept another set of plants in silence. And later, when caterpillars fed on these plants, the set that had been exposed to the noises produced by caterpillars eating repelled them by exuding more of a caterpillar-repelling chemical. So they learned. They were primed to produce a deterrent, which I think is extremely clever of the plants. They respond to other vibrations too, like the sound of wind or different insects, but they didn't produce different chemicals accordingly. So that suggests that they have a sophisticated way of telling the difference between predator noises and atmospheric ones, which is impressive in itself. And then previous research had found that 2 genes in rice, for God's sake, switch on in response to music and clear tones. I wonder what they like, probably Mozart. And that corn roots lean toward vibrations of a specific frequency. I just think this is quite miraculous. These are when I read things like this, I go right back to being mystified why people need religion. So, since plants don't normally experience music or pure tones and vibrations in their environment, at least that we know of, the next question researchers are asking is, why would plants evolve this ability to hear sounds or vibrations when it doesn't have anything to do with predators? I say it's pure pleasure. I say it's the aesthetics of plants. That's what I say. And I say that all 3 of these rather strange items belong in the surrealism corner, as probably I do today and many days. It's time for another brief pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Of the wonderful women who pass through this show, this next one is another one. She made a change in her own life, and then she went on to make great changes in the lives of other women, including saving some of the lives of other women. Don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
And we're back again, this time with Meg Baldwin, who is the Executive Director of Refuge House, the domestic and sexual violence center that serves the large 8-county Big Bend area in Florida. You can find out more about it at refugehouse.com. Meg is a nationally recognized expert on the legal, social, and advocacy issues faced by prostituted women and children. She was instrumental in creating one of the very first advocacy and support agencies for women trying to escape and heal from prostitution. And Meg drafted the first state legislation to provide civil remedies for women coerced in prostitution against perpetrators. And that legislation has become the model for legislation adopted in other states. All in all, quite a woman, Meg Baldwin. Meg Baldwin, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Robin. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I want to start by saying that you were an associate professor of law at Florida State University College of Law, specializing in women's rights, violence against women, and prostitution. And now you are the executive director of Refuge House, which is this amazing Domestic Violence and Sexual Violence Center, which serves 8 counties. And you've been doing this since 2005. Say a little about the transition. It's not that usual that an academic becomes right front and center an activist.
I think, Robin, it's I've been fortunate to be able to be an activist and an advocate for women, particularly victims of violence, really ever since I was a young woman. I was very grateful to be a faculty member at FSU, where I was also able to deepen that advocacy with research and the connection with other professional colleagues for nearly 2 decades. So I guess I saw it as less of a transition than other people might have perceived. Actually,
would that everybody regarded it as seamlessly as you do? Because you're quite right. I mean, they should be seamless, and you still advocate as well as providing direct services. But everybody is not like you, Meg. I have to bring the bad news here.
Well, that's probably many people would consider that a blessing.
Well, I don't, and clearly the women and some men of the 8 counties that you serve would consider you a real gift to the community. Talk a little bit about Refuge House. I just want to share a couple of figures with our listeners that I pulled from the website. In between 2012 and 13, Refuge House responded to almost 3,000 domestic violence-related hotline calls and almost 800 sexual assault calls. 358 women, children, and men sought safety in the emergency shelters provided. Over 1,300 survivors reached out for assistance in securing protective orders through the Leon County Courthouse office, and over 1,200 survivors gained healing and hope in counseling and therapy. That's a hell of a record. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's an honor to serve victims of sexual assault and domestic violence in our communities. And as impressive as those numbers may sound, we know, too, that we're really only reaching a small number of victims who are experiencing violence and exploitation. So we're always looking to improve the level of outreach we're able to perform and the trust that victims have in us, that we can be useful to them in supporting their safety and healing.
You're unusual also in that your portfolio, as it were, covers both domestic violence and also sexual assault. Many shelter organizations do one or the other, but not both.
That's right, and that can be a challenge for us, but we also believe that providing services for both forms of victimization helps us reach more deeply into the lives of women who often are victims of sexual assault in childhood, become then later victims of rape, whether in school or in their or victims of sexual harassment in their jobs.
Right.
May also be victims of domestic violence from intimate partners. And by serving, by reaching both forms of victimization, we're really able to support girls and women really across the lifespan, where those forms of violence and exploitation are often connected.
Oh, that's so smart, and it's such a model and now that you say it, it seems like the nose on our face, because we know that if you come from an abusive childhood, sexually abused, physically abused, and that's the only model you've seen of, quote, love, unquote, and attention, you tend to seek out that in a partner. And so it's a lifelong trajectory, and that you address the whole and not just the parts is so smart.
It also helps by not segmenting our services. It also helps our staff reach a level of expertise in working with women who have had those multiple exploitative events and need us to be attentive and able to respond to that level of trauma too.
It's wonderful. Meg, talk a little bit about the work that you've done in terms of campus sexual assault.
Well, Tallahassee, where our services are based primarily, is a relatively small city, but we are the site of 2 large universities. Florida State University that has a student population of over 40,000, and Florida A&M University that has a student population of about 11,000.
Wow.
And in our rape crisis program, as well as our counseling services, about half of the sexual assault victims that we serve in the face-to-face setting are students. And that shouldn't really surprise us with the understanding that we're gaining over the last several years as to the high incidence of sexual assault in which students are the targets and victims.
Yes. What the study that you did, or that is being done, that compares campus sexual assault done by athletes and campus sexual assault by perpetrators who are not athletes. Say a few words about that, because I thought that the differences and what was not different and what was is very illuminating.
You know, there's the information that we tend to collect about victimization patterns among the students that reach out for services from us doesn't strongly distinguish, and we don't see a strong distinction between perpetrators who are athletes and those who are not, or for that matter, perpetration that is connected with fraternity parties and other kinds of settings that is often associated with high rates of sexual assault. What we do see, though, is that there can be big differences in the response to an attack that involves an athlete, both institutionally, but more importantly at the community level.
Of course, yes.
I think we have a lot to learn about how we can transform many of our institutions to be more supportive and responsive to victims of sexual assault. You know, we've seen it's hard for institutions to come to grips with the ways in which we can do better in serving victims effectively. We've seen that difficulty in the Catholic Church, for example, in the military, for example.
That's right.
And you know, in domestic violence situations, we see how family members can be shocked and sometimes
collaborative,
misdirected in who they think the perpetrator is and what the level of violence they believe is actually happening. Often wrapped around a desire to keep the family unit intact, or to believe that the perpetrator can make changes and recognizes his own violence in a way that doesn't tear apart an existing family. And we're very familiar with those dynamics as they play out with domestic violence, and I think we probably could learn from that history in thinking about the ways in which institutions, too, tend to resist coming to grips with what's actually happening within the culture of the institution.
This is fascinating, Meg, because we as feminists, we run around all the time saying the patriarchal family, the family structure as we now know it, is the model for the state, for all the institutions. And even though it no longer seems to be, that's the backstory. I hope you will write something about this.
I hope that at some point I have some time to do that.
Oh, well, let me put in a strong word for that, because we have to go now, but we need that, and you can't be everywhere. It can go places you can't, and the connections that you're making about institutional betrayal, sexism, violence, in effect, which is unconscious or denied, whether it's in the family or in existing institutions that we are familiar with, is very important connection to make. So please think about that. I'll call you back at some point and nag you.
Thank you, Robin. I would be honored to be nagged by you on any occasion.
Well, thank you for the amazing work that you're doing, and for the work that you'll continue to do. And thank you also for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
It's time for one last break here at Women's Media Center Live, where I am still Robin Morgan. And today I'm rather pleased that I'm still Robin Morgan, because I get to meet all these wonderful women. And we will be back in just a moment ourselves with Fighting Words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
And welcome back again to some Fighting Words. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for the younger listeners among you, comes out of the women's movement. You wouldn't necessarily know that back in the 70s and the 80s, she pled cases of reproductive rights before the Supreme Court. So she's one of our own, and she showed her true colors again recently, quite marvelously. I had my moments of worrying now and then, not so much in her decisions and dissents, but in that she is friends with Scalia. And that, I think, pushes collegiality to a point of absurdity. They have dinners together, their families, they celebrate holidays, they go on vacations together. Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it just doesn't mix. Anyway, departing from Scalia for a moment, Ruth issued a scathing 35-page dissent in the ghastly 5-4 court decision a week or so ago, granting corporations First Amendment religious rights so that they could deny women birth control coverage. This was, of course, the infamous Hobby Lobby decision. Granting private companies the right to be exempt from laws that their owners don't agree with is insane. So Ruth took to her computer and wrote that the court had ventured into a minefield. I urge you to go online. It's easily findable on the Supreme Court website, or if you just Google Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent to Hobby Lobby decision, and find the entire 35-page dissent, because it's brilliant. But because our time is limited here, I'm going to share with you 10 points from it that are the central core of the dissent, and they are pretty incendiary as is. So, here we go. 1. Would the exemption, she asks, would the exemption extend to employers with religiously grounded objections to blood transfusions? That would be Jehovah's Witnesses. Antidepressants, that would be Scientologists. Medications derived from pigs, including anesthesia, intravenous fluids, and pills coated with gelatin. That would be certain Muslims, Jews, and Hindus. And vaccinations? Not much help there for the lower courts, she writes, that are bound by today's decision. 2. Approving some religious claims while deeming others unworthy of accommodation could be perceived as favoring one religion over another, the very risk the Constitution's Establishment Clause was designed to preclude. 3. Religious organizations exist to foster the interests of persons subscribing to the same religious faith. Not so of for-profit corporations. Workers who sustain the operations of these corporations commonly are not drawn from a single religious community. 4. The exemption sought by Hobby Lobby and Conestoga, you remember that was the other plaintiff, would deny legions of women who do not hold their employers' beliefs access to contraceptive coverage. 5. Any decision to use contraceptives made by a woman covered under Hobby Lobby's or Conestoga's plan will not be propelled by the government. It will be the woman's autonomous choice, informed by the physician she consults. 6. It bears note in this regard that the cost of an IUD is nearly equivalent to a month's full-time pay for workers earning the minimum wage. 7. Even if one were to conclude that Hobby Lobby and Conestoga meet the substantial burden requirement, the government has shown that the contraceptive coverage for which the Affordable Care Act provides further compelling interests in public health and women's well-being. Those interests are concrete, specific, and demonstrated by a wealth of empirical evidence. 8. The distinction between a community made up of believers in the same religion and one embracing persons of diverse beliefs, clear as it is, constantly escapes this court's attention. One can only wonder why the court shuts this key difference from sight. I think that that's Ruth's dig at the religious composition of the court these days, because the majority of the court, there are 6, are Roman Catholics, and then there are 3 Jews, and there are no Protestants. And I think it's a dig at the Catholics. 9. Suppose an employer's sincerely held religious belief is offended by health coverage of vaccines, or paying the minimum wage, or according women equal pay for substantially similar work. And 10. The court does not even begin to explain how one might go about ascertaining the religious scruples of a corporation where shares are sold to the public. No need to speculate on that, the court says, for it seems unlikely that large corporations will often assert Religious Freedom Act claims. Well, to that she clearly thinks, and I say that, how shall I put this delicately? If you spread that kind of thinking on my roses, they would grow. In fact, all of the rhetoric about controlling women's bodies, which masks itself in religion and morality, is just that. But Ruth named it, and took no prisoners in these 10 points. And I say, go Ruth. She is a woman for whom justice, starting off her name, fits very well. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her 80s, not well, holding on there, and may she do so for a long, long time. Thank you, Ruth. And that's it for this week. You've been listening to us on CBS Radio WJFK 1580 AM, or you've been visiting us at WMCLive.com for this and for a whole rich archive of all of our previous episodes. Be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook, Twitter, and at iTunes worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton. Senior Producer, Crystal Williams Chancellor. And our founding sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan. Thank you for being with us. Join us next week because we have a great show coming up. Shannon Watts of Moms Demand Action Against Guns will be here, as will Ari Horn, the Japanese online expert who founded a startup to help other women with startups. And singer-songwriter Melissa Geiges will bring us behind the scenes of her new record, Just When I Let Go, and share an unforgettable song from it, too. Plus some surprises, you never know, because it's here on Women's Media Center, live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio and WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.